Okay, so back to the all-important topic of how to prioritize, which again, as I said in my last video, is the essence really of effectiveness, in my view, is not only having a full view of everything that you need to do and want to do, but being able to make decisions about when essentially you tackle each of those things that you have to and want to do. So again, the primary tool that I use for my daily action steps and setting up my day is the Eisenhower decision matrix. Again, this emphasis on decision, because that really is what's required. Once you have already dumped all your ideas, the next step really is deciding in what order and when you do each of those things. So again, to recap the way that this is outlined, anything urgent, top urgency to descending urgency, importance, most important to less important. So this is least important and least urgent on this side. So this is axes, okay? How do I determine which things end up in top priority and then descending? So first and foremost, if something is happening today or happening at a specific time and is not going to be negotiated or is not negotiable, for example, if it is in your schedule for today, I have an appointment at this time, I have a deadline at this time, those things are going to be unmovably urgent on a given day. So, for example, on Friday, I've scratched out, I had a 9 a.m., a 10 a.m., a 10:30 a.m., a 3 p.m., and a 6:45 p.m. appointment. Most of them were meetings. I also occasionally set a timed deadline. Actually, I do it a lot, especially if I need a deliverable from someone else. I will ask them to set a specific time that they will deliver it, which essentially has the function of guaranteeing a commitment and a handoff. So sometimes I'll artificially impose a deadline on myself or someone else, team member, to get it into that spot of a particular day. It will be urgent. It will require whatever preparation in advance to take place by a certain time so that it can be done at a particular time. So those are just some tips and tricks on how to enforce urgency. But in general, things that are obligations, be they appointments, be they deadlines, are going to end up in urgent and important, because the importance comes in with regard to, if I miss this deadline, it will have impact. For me, importance and impact are pretty entangled, if not synonymous, interchangeable terms. If something is important, it's going to matter. So what happens if I miss a deadline? What happens if I skip an appointment? Sometimes it's not a big deal, but I would question in that case, is this something I should change if it looks like I am not going to be able to meet this deadline? Would it be a right decision to prioritize something else and move this appointment or deadline? Other than that, if you've made a commitment, especially if it is to someone else, your reputation will be damaged if you are not reliable and do not follow through on your commitments. When it comes to yourself, I think a lot of us are more willing to make an exception and not deliver something to ourselves, even if we decide I will do this on this time and on this date. But I think that really damages the entire relationship of self-respect, of self-care, and that it's very important to keep commitments to ourselves. So that's something that's a bit of a separate topic, but I would say again that there is high impact to failing to meet a time-bound appointment, deadline, obligation. So those things are going to get way near the top in urgency and importance. Now, as to the other things that are not maybe time-bound in the sense of it must happen at 3 p.m. or something, my things that I mark with orange are always, unless there's some reason for a logical exception to help my brain organize itself, they're going to be in that upper left-hand quadrant, because not only do they have to happen today, is what my orange means, they are important. They have some kind of greater impact. This task that was marked orange on Friday, which again, I did actually make headway on. It was not a deliverable handoff that day, but I did what I could. It has impact on how far I can advance toward a deadline that comes up at the end, or well, actually the beginning of not tomorrow, new week, but the following Monday. And so in order to meet that final deadline, which is 9 a.m. Monday, the 28th, I have to give sufficient lead time between the milestones along the way, of which there are, let's say 3, okay? It's a little negotiable. But so these are things I want to ensure that I do on a given day. I do not want to leave my desk at work until I have completed a work-related orange task. I do not want to get in bed at night without having done my orange tasks, unless for some reason I reschedule entirely and make a decision to move something to another day, which is another big thing that I do when it comes to planning, is to actually map out at least a week at a time what my top focus and goals are, and what my week will not be successful unless I do these things tasks are. So those are again going to be the top priority and importance tasks. Now, things that are in the quadrant below that are marked as urgent but not important. So they're things that I need to get done soon because of some kind of a deadline, but they are not necessarily important. They don't necessarily have a big impact. And so what I would use as an example for this is, say there's a workshop coming up for some kind of a hobby that you're maybe marginally interested in. You might try it out at some point. It's not a guaranteed hit for you, and you have other options of how you could use your time. But if you're gonna sign up for the workshop, you have to do so by the end of this week. So it's something that wouldn't necessarily have some kind of big impact on the quality of your life. It's interchangeable with other things. But if you're going to do it, there's a deadline. Or alternatively, maybe it's something that you want to get off your plate. I actually could argue with myself about whether sending through the mail correspondence is important in terms of impact, relationship impact. But generally speaking, I've already got the card, the postcard, whatever. It's a matter of deciding what to say and mailing it. And sometimes those are tasks that if I don't just do them, they pile up as a bunch of little open loops, is terminology I've heard used. Or maybe it is something that is a first step in a series of things, such as I have to unload the dishwasher so that I can reload the dishwasher. I don't want to look at these plates from this morning and from my cooking, all day. So I need to do that. Honestly, I don't typically write that stuff down unless I'm just trying to, on a short list, and I don't have one right now, but determine what I want to do in what order to logically have nice flow to my day. Sometimes I'll do time-bound tasks. So anyway, things that you need to do soon, but things that are not going to have huge ripples on your life and your reputation, and they're not going to create blockers necessarily, right? And well, they might. Okay, I think you get the point. Now, let's do this quadrant first, because I have more to say about the one above it. So that quadrant, the lower right-hand side, is the one that has the least urgency and the least importance. In fact, most people would say these are things that if you never got around to them, they probably wouldn't matter that much. They're things we tend to continue to put off. So the question with regard to that quadrant is, do I want it on my to-do list at all? Or does it belong somewhere else? Is it on a maybe I'll get to it someday bucket list? I'm a big believer in having different types of organized lists. Off the top of my head, staples for the refrigerator, ways to upgrade my home, ways to spend my free time. If I have a future holiday coming up, how might I go about it? Things to like entertainment wise, and I gather these things and organize them because they have their time and place. For me, a lot of times the things that end up in that lower right hand quadrant really need to be shunted into another location so that on demand I can pull that information when I'm in the state where I'm planning a vacation or I'm gonna be bored on a weekend, or I want to try a new project, what I have the bandwidth to try a new project or sign up for a workshop, which one do I want to choose now? What's speaking to me? So again, I do have a list of just sort of fun, crafty projects that like that. It's another list I have. But my point is, for things that do not necessarily belong there, and by the way, staple food items is not exactly an action list, but my point was I keep organized lists. Decide if you even want that in your short-term memory, because that's really what this system is about, is your short-term focus and memory. So for me, what I have repurposed this quadrant for is things to happen in the upcoming week. And it's typically things like appointments. I don't tend to put assignments there unless I'm scared that I will forget. I never do, but it gives me some peace of mind to just reiterate things there sometimes. So I've repurposed that quadrant entirely. And if there are things that are not coming up in the next week that I want to keep in mind, and they are a little bit, they're not due soon, I'll put that sort of right above it, typically with a little arrow to the left. So, you know, on here I have a reminder that I want to test firmware again next week with the team. It wasn't something I could act on last week. I'm not going to put a particular date on it, but it needs to happen next week, kind of thing. All right, so on to, I remembered that this one is Q2, so it must go 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't genuinely remember the order, but Q2 I know is this one. And Q2 is the one that I believe Stephen Covey calls sharpening the saw. So what goes there is your more long-term projects, typically speaking, the ones that are going to matter to you most, but that it's very easy to continue to say, I'll get around to it. So his statement is that these are actually the highest impact things and where you should be spending most of your focus. The things that end up to the left of that in the urgent and important are the things that you actually have to get done today. However, you want to spend more of your time, energy, and other resources in Q2, because those are the things that like your legacy work. So for me, my writing, my music, really exercise and things like that, though that's usually just, you know, part of the work or the daily flow and doesn't end up on a piece of paper for me unless I'm like needing to reinstall a habit or something. These are the things that really demand investment if we're going to get the most juice out of life. So I was asked for the previous video, you know, how do you determine basically where your personal projects fit? And the answer to that is there. Now, I would say if you're somebody who has a little bit of trouble knowing where and how to take action, breaking it up into steps and then giving each step a committed time to act on it and a deadline day is probably a pretty good way of bringing your focus to those things. But again, you're going to run this risk of wanting to put that stuff off because it does not have, an immediate consequence of, for example, incurring a higher APR or a fee penalty or missing your opportunity to vote. It doesn't have some immediate painful consequence. The pain of it is going to be, I'm not progressing towards something that really matters to me. So that Q2 is really, really important. And building it in and focusing on that as much as you can. This principle, Pareto's principle of the 20% of tasks with 80% impact, where we should flip that and spend 80% of our time on that 20% of tasks in order to get that 80% impact, you know, to invest in it and get more impact out of our choices. That is really the place where you want to take pieces of it and bump them into urgency, because you want to really focus on making progress with your Q2. So hopefully that helps explain how I make decisions. You know, depending on context, there will be other considerations. For example, you know, responding to email. How do you triage that? I have basically a decision-making process for most things in my life. And I do believe that having a system like that is predetermined makes it easier and removes a lot of the anxiety that comes along with making decisions. So again, I am someone who prefers a fairly streamlined, pre-decided approach, but I sense that it's something that if modified would probably, after you see the results, appeal to most people. So if it seems too rigid, I would say think about how you could modify it to really suit what you prefer. It might actually work.